I pulled into the gravel lot at 11:30, my headlights cutting through the kind of darkness that felt thick enough to touch. The truck stop squatted under buzzing fluorescent lights, like something that had crawled out of the bush and decided to stay. Highway 17 stretched empty in both directions, not another building in sight. The job posting had said night clerk, remote location, good pay. What it hadn't mentioned was how the place would make my skin crawl before I even got out of my car. Frank Gardner was waiting by the front door, a stocky guy in his 60s with steel gray hair and the kind of deep lines that came from seeing too much. His handshake was firm, but his fingers trembled slightly, like he'd had too much coffee or not enough sleep. Willow Cox? His voice carried a slight Irish accent worn smooth by decades in Canada. That's me. Good. Come on, let's get you sorted. The fluorescent lights hit me like a slap when we walked inside. They buzzed with this aggressive hum that made my teeth ache, casting everything in harsh white that somehow made the shadows in the corners look darker. The air tasted metallic, like I'd been sucking on pennies. Frank pulled a laminated card from his shirt pocket and handed it over. 5 rules. Memorize them tonight. I read the first line and looked up at him. Seriously? Dead serious. His pale blue eyes didn't hold even a hint of humor. Rule 1. If you hear knocking from the washrooms after midnight, don't answer. Don't look. Stay behind the counter until it stops. The card felt warm in my hands, like it had been sitting under a heat lamp. The rules were typed in simple black text. 1. Never respond to knocking from the washrooms after midnight. 2. When the wind chimes ring, play Hotel California on the jukebox immediately. 3. If someone asks for directions to a place that doesn't exist, give them anyway. 4. Close the store if headlights approach from the west between midnight and 4 a.m. 5. Never look directly at the woman in the red dress. What kind of truck stop needs rules like this? I asked, but Frank was already moving toward the back of the store. The kind that pays $22 an hour for sitting behind a counter. He gestured around the space, 3 aisles of snacks and road supplies, a coffee station that had seen better decades, and a register that looked older than I was. Coffee machine's temperamental. Tap it twice if it starts making that grinding noise. Washrooms are over there, but like I said, don't go near them after midnight. Got it. I tucked the card into my back pocket. What happens if I break one of these rules? Frank stopped walking. His shoulders went rigid, and he turned back to me with an expression I couldn't read. Ashley Gonzalez used to ask questions like that. Used to? She worked nights until 3 weeks ago. Broke rule number 5. He pointed to a set of wind chimes hanging above the entrance, thin metal tubes that caught the fluorescent light. Those'll warn you when something's coming. Jukebox is in the corner there. Takes quarters, but it'll play Hotel California for free if you hit B7. I followed his gaze to an ancient Wurlitzer that looked like it belonged in a 50s diner. And if I don't play it fast enough, then you'll find out why Ashley doesn't work here anymore. The way he said it made my stomach drop. Frank's hands were shaking worse now, and he kept glancing toward the washroom doors like he expected them to burst open. Look, Frank, just follow the rules, Willow. That's all you need to do. He headed toward the back office, then paused. I'll be doing inventory until dawn. Holler if you need anything, but only if it's an emergency. And then I was alone. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like angry wasps. I tried adjusting the radio behind the counter, but all I got was static and the occasional burst of what sounded like voices speaking backwards. The coffee machine gurgled to itself in the corner, and every few minutes the building would creak like it was settling, even though there wasn't any wind. I spent the first hour reading Ashley's training notes, which were still taped to the register. Her handwriting was neat, precise, the kind of person who color-coded her class notes. She'd written helpful reminders like coffee filters under sink and bathroom key on blue keychain. But toward the bottom of the page, the writing got messier. Check wind chimes every 15 minutes was scrawled in what looked like a different pen, and below that, why won't Frank explain the rules? Around 1 a.m., a trucker came in for cigarettes and energy drinks. Normal transaction, normal guy complaining about the long haul to Thunder Bay. But when he left, I noticed he walked faster than necessary and didn't look back at the building. At 1:47, I heard the first knock. It came from the women's washroom, soft and hesitant. Tap, tap, tap. Then a pause. Tap, tap, tap. I remembered Rule 1 and crouched behind the counter, my heart hammering against my ribs. The knocking came again, more insistent now. "Hello?" A woman's voice, muffled by the door. "Is someone there? I need help." My hand moved toward the counter's edge before I caught myself. The voice sounded so normal, so genuinely distressed. What if someone was actually in trouble? "Please," the voice continued, and now I could hear tears in it. "I'm hurt. I can't get the door open." The knocking turned violent. Bang, bang, bang. The sound echoed through the store like gunshots, and I pressed my hands over my mouth to keep from crying out. The washroom door rattled in its frame, and I could hear something wet hitting the other side, like someone was throwing buckets of water against it. "Help me!" The voice was screaming now, raw and desperate. "Why won't you help me?" The banging spread to the walls, a rhythmic pounding that made the whole building shake. Bottles rattled on the shelves and the fluorescent lights flickered. I squeezed my eyes shut and tried to count my breathing, but the sound was everywhere, surrounding me. Then Frank was there, appearing from the back office like a ghost. He pressed a finger to his lips and crouched beside me behind the counter. His face was pale but calm, like this was just another Tuesday night. We waited. The pounding continued for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. The voice kept pleading, kept screaming, kept begging for help that we couldn't give. Frank's hand found my shoulder and squeezed, anchoring me to something real. Finally, silence. We stayed crouched for another full minute before Frank slowly stood and peered over the counter. I followed his gaze toward the washroom doors, which hung open now even though I was sure they'd been closed before. Wet footprints led from the women's washroom to the front entrance, dark against the linoleum. They looked like bare feet, but wrong somehow. Too long, with spaces where toes should be. "What the hell was that?" I whispered. Frank was already grabbing a mop from behind the counter. "Just another night at the truck stop, kid. You did good. Most people try to help the first time." "Most people?" "The ones who last more than one shift." He started mopping up the footprints, which disappeared under the suds like they'd never been there. "Ashley made it 2 weeks before curiosity got the better of her." I stared at the washroom doors, which were closed again now. What happened to her? Frank's mop paused mid-stroke. She started asking the wrong questions, started thinking she could fix things. He looked up at me with those tired blue eyes. "Some things can't be fixed, Willow. They can only be managed." The rest of the shift passed without incident, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me from the corners where the fluorescent lights couldn't quite reach. When dawn finally broke through the windows, painting everything in pale gold, I felt like I could breathe again. Frank emerged from the back office looking like he'd aged a decade overnight. "You'll be back tomorrow?" I should have said no. Should have walked out and never looked back. Instead, I found myself nodding. "Good." He almost smiled. "You might actually survive this job." As I walked to my car, I could swear I heard wind chimes ringing behind me, even though there wasn't a breath of wind. I pushed through the glass doors at 11:15, my hands still shaking from the drive over. I'd spent the entire day telling myself I wouldn't come back, that no amount of money was worth whatever the hell had happened last night. But here I was, because apparently I was either braver or stupider than I'd thought. Frank was restocking cigarettes behind the counter, and when he saw me, his whole face changed. The tight lines around his eyes relaxed, and something that might have been relief flickered across his features. "Didn't think you'd show," he said, but there was warmth in his voice now that hadn't been there yesterday. "Yeah, well, neither did I." I hung my jacket on the hook behind the register. "But I need the money, and I figure if I survived one night, maybe I can survive another. That's the spirit." Frank actually smiled, which transformed his weathered face completely. "Most people don't make it past the first encounter. You did good last night, staying put when that thing was banging around." I pulled the laminated rule card from my pocket. "I memorized these, but I still don't understand what I'm dealing with here." Frank's expression shifted, becoming more guarded. Ashley used to say the same thing, always wanting to understand the why behind everything. He gestured toward the washroom doors. She was smart, real smart, studying folklore and anthropology up at the university. Thought she could figure out what made this place tick. What happened to her? She started pushing boundaries, testing the rules instead of following them. Frank's hand stilled on the cigarette cartons. The things here, they don't like being studied. They prefer people who just accept the situation and do their job. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, that same aggressive hum that made my teeth ache. I tried to imagine someone like Ashley working here, someone who approached mysteries with academic curiosity instead of survival instinct. How long did she last? 3 weeks. Longer than most, but not long enough. Frank finished with the cigarettes and moved to check the coffee machine. She kept notes, asked questions, tried to map out patterns, real methodical about it. The front door chimed, and we both looked up as a woman in her 40s walked in. She was tall and solid-looking, with dark skin and graying hair pulled back in a braid. Her clothes were practical: work shirt, jeans, boots that had seen a lot of highway miles. A trucker, definitely, but something about the way she moved caught my attention. She walked like someone who was constantly aware of her surroundings, her eyes cataloging everything without seeming to look directly at anything. "Evening, Iris," Frank called out, and I caught the slight tension in his voice. "Frank." She nodded at him, then glanced at me. "New girl?" "Willowcox, second night." Iris studied me for a moment, and I had the weird feeling she was seeing more than just my face. Her gaze flicked to the washroom doors, then back to me. "Coffee's fresh," I offered, trying to break the uncomfortable silence. "Thanks." She moved toward the coffee station, but I noticed how she gave the washroom area a wide berth, like there was an invisible barrier she wouldn't cross. While she fixed her coffee, I tried to make conversation. "Long haul tonight?" "Always is." Iris's voice was careful, measured. "You settling in okay here?" Still figuring things out. Frank's been helpful with the, unusual aspects of the job." Iris went very still. She turned to look at me directly for the first time, and her dark eyes were intense. "Best advice I can give you? Don't try to figure anything out. Just follow the rules and keep your head down." "But don't you wonder—" "No." The word came out sharp enough to cut. Wondering gets people hurt. Wondering got Ashley hurt. She paid for her coffee and headed toward the door, then paused. "This place has been here a long time, and it'll be here long after we're gone. Your job is to survive your shifts, not solve mysteries." The door chimed as she left, and I watched through the window as she walked to a big rig parked at the far edge of the lot. Even from a distance, I could see her checking her mirrors, scanning the darkness before climbing into the cab. "She seems friendly," I said. Frank snorted. "Iris has been driving this route for years. She's seen things." He came back to the counter and leaned against it. "She's not wrong, you know, about keeping your head down." But Ashley didn't listen. "No, she didn't." Frank's expression grew distant. "Smart girl, but she thought being smart was enough. Thought if she could just understand the rules, she could find a way around them. The building creaked around us, settling into the rhythm of another night shift. I found myself staring at the washroom doors, remembering the wet footprints and the desperate voice pleading for help. Frank, what exactly are we dealing with here? I mean, what are these things? He was quiet for so long I thought he wasn't going to answer. Finally, he sighed. Honestly, I don't know. Been here longer than I care to admit, and I still don't have all the answers. What I do know is that they're drawn to certain things: fear, confusion, curiosity. New employees are like catnip to them. Great, so I'm basically walking bait. Only if you let yourself be. Frank pulled a rag from under the counter and started wiping down surfaces that were already clean. The rules work, Willow. They've kept people safe for years. Trust them, even when they don't make sense. Around midnight, a few more truckers came through. Normal transactions, normal people who paid for gas and snacks and left without incident, but I noticed they all moved quickly, efficiently, like they didn't want to linger. And none of them went near the washrooms. At 1:30, I was restocking the candy aisle when I heard it, a soft metallic sound from above. I looked up to see the wind chimes swaying gently, their tubes catching the fluorescent light. My blood went cold. Rule 2. When the wind chimes ring, play Hotel California on the jukebox immediately. But as I stared at the chimes, my mind went completely blank. Which button was it? Frank had said something about B7, but suddenly I couldn't remember if that was right. B7? A7? The chimes were ringing louder now, a discordant melody that made my skin crawl. I ran toward the jukebox in the corner, my hands shaking as I fumbled for quarters. But before I could feed any into the machine, it lit up on its own. The display started cycling through songs. Sweet Caroline, Don't Stop Believin', Bohemian Rhapsody, but not the one I needed. The temperature in the store dropped 10 degrees in as many seconds. I could see my breath now, little puffs of vapor in the suddenly frigid air. And then I saw them. Dark shapes seeping under the front door like spilled ink, spreading across the linoleum in tendrils that moved with purpose. Frank! I screamed, but my voice came out as barely a whisper. The jukebox kept cycling through songs, the display flashing different titles in rapid succession. The dark shapes were spreading faster now, reaching toward the counter, toward me. I could feel something cold and hungry in them, something that wanted to wrap around my ankles and pull me down into whatever darkness they came from. Frank burst out of the back office, took one look at the situation, and slammed his palm against the side of the jukebox. The machine made a grinding noise, sparked once, and then Hotel California filled the store. The effect was immediate. The dark shapes recoiled like they'd been burned, pulling back toward the door in writhing streams. The temperature started climbing back to normal, and the wind chimes fell silent. I stood there gasping, my heart hammering against my ribs. I couldn't remember which button. B7, Frank said, but his voice was gentle. It's B7, but the machine's been acting up lately. Sometimes you have to convince it. He patted the jukebox's side affectionately. Good thing I heard the chimes. What would have happened if you hadn't? Frank looked at the front door, where the last of the dark shapes were disappearing back into the night. Nothing good. Those things are drawn to hesitation, to fear. They can smell it on you. He stayed close for the rest of the shift, showing me exactly which buttons to press on the jukebox, how to tap the coffee machine when it started making that grinding noise, where the spare quarters were kept in case the machine decided to be difficult. The key is not to panic, he explained as we went through the motions. These things feed on strong emotions: fear, anger, desperation. The calmer you stay, the less interested they are in you. Is that why Ashley got in trouble? Because she was afraid? No. Frank's expression darkened. Ashley wasn't afraid enough. She thought she could outsmart them, control them. That's a different kind of dangerous. As dawn approached, I found myself actually relaxing. The fluorescent lights seemed less harsh, the building's creaks less ominous. Frank was organizing receipts behind the counter when I decided to clean the area around the register. That's when I found it. A small notebook wedged between the register and the wall, like someone had shoved it there in a hurry. The cover was plain black, and when I opened it, I recognized the same neat handwriting from the training notes taped to the register. Ashley's journal. The first few entries were mundane. Observations about customer patterns, notes about which truckers were regulars, complaints about the coffee machine. But as I flipped through the pages, the tone changed. She'd started documenting the weird incidents, trying to find patterns in when the rules were triggered. November 3rd, wind chimes rang at 2:17 a.m., played Hotel California, shadows retreated immediately. Why that song specifically? What's the connection? November 8th, knocking from washrooms lasted exactly 7 minutes and 23 seconds, same duration as last week. There's a pattern here, I'm sure of it. November 12th, saw the woman in red dress through security monitor, but she wasn't there when I looked directly. Rule 5 says, never look at her directly. But what happens if you do? The entries got more detailed, more obsessive. Ashley had been mapping out everything, times, durations, environmental factors. She'd even drawn diagrams of the store layout, marking where different phenomena occurred. But the final pages were torn out, leaving only ragged edges in the binding. Find something interesting? Frank's voice made me jump. He was standing right behind me, looking down at the journal in my hands. Ashley's notes. She was really trying to figure this place out. Frank's jaw tightened. Yeah, she was, right up until she figured out too much. He held out his hand. Maybe you should put that back where you found it. I looked down at the journal, then back at Frank. What happened to the missing pages? Ashley took them with her the night she broke Rule 5. Frank's voice was quiet, sad. Haven't seen either since. I closed the journal and handed it over, but Frank shook his head. Keep it if you want. Just remember, some questions don't have answers you want to hear. As I walked to my car in the pale morning light, I clutched the journal against my chest. Frank was probably right about the dangers of curiosity, but I couldn't shake the feeling that Ashley had been onto something important, something worth the risk of finding out. I was 20 minutes into my third shift when Sadie Cruz appeared like a ghost materializing from the fluorescent haze. I'd heard about her but never actually seen her, the night manager who supposedly worked days but showed up at weird hours to check on things. She moved through the store like she was walking on broken glass, her shoulders hunched and her eyes never quite landing on anything directly. Everything about her screamed nervous energy barely held in check. "You're Willow." Not a question. Her voice was soft, clipped, like she was rationing words. "That's me. You must be Sadie." She nodded once, already moving toward the back office. "Just checking inventory. Don't mind me." But I did mind her. The way she avoided looking at the washroom doors, how she kept glancing at the wind chimes like they might start ringing any second. She knew exactly what this place was, and it was eating her alive. I went back to Ashley's journal, which I'd been reading between customers. The entries painted a picture of someone methodically documenting every weird thing that happened here. She'd cataloged each entity, tried to map their behaviors, even sketched rough diagrams of where different phenomena occurred. November 15th, the woman in the red dress appeared on security monitor at 3:47 a.m., stayed visible for exactly 90 seconds before vanishing. She was pointing at something behind the counter, but I couldn't see what. November 18th, washroom incident lasted longer tonight, almost 10 minutes. The voice was different too, younger. It knew my name. November 22nd. Found wet footprints leading from washrooms to jukebox. They stopped right in front of it like whatever made them was listening to the music. The detail was incredible, but also obsessive. Ashley had been treating this place like a research project, and I was starting to understand why Frank looked so worried whenever her name came up. The sound of boxes crashing came from the back office, followed by Sadie's muffled curse. A few minutes later, she emerged looking even more rattled than before. "Everything okay back there?" I asked. "Fine, just clumsy." But her hands were shaking as she straightened her glasses. "You should put that away." I looked down at the journal. Ashley's notes. "I'm just trying to understand." "Don't!" The word came out sharp enough to cut. "Understanding doesn't help. It just makes things worse." She was already heading for the door, moving with that same careful precision, like the floor might give way beneath her feet. But she paused at the entrance, her hand on the glass. "Some nights are different," she said without turning around. "Tonight feels like one of them. Be extra careful." And then she was gone, leaving me alone with Ashley's increasingly frantic handwriting and a growing sense that I was missing something important. Around midnight, I saw the headlights. They appeared in the distance, coming from the west, just like Rule 4 warned about. 2 white points of light cutting through the darkness, approaching fast. Too fast. I flipped the store sign to closed and hit the light switches, dimming everything except the emergency lighting. The fluorescent buzz died to a whisper, and suddenly the building felt different, smaller, more vulnerable. Through the window, I watched the pickup truck barrel down the highway at a speed that should have been impossible. The headlights weren't normal white. They burned with this intense, almost blue-white glare that hurt to look at directly. The truck was going to pass right by the store. Had to be. Nothing could take that turn into our lot at that speed. But as it got closer, I could see the driver. My blood turned to ice water. It was Ashley, or something wearing Ashley's face. Her mouth was open in what looked like a scream, but no sound reached me through the glass. Her hands gripped the steering wheel so tight I could see her knuckles standing out white against her skin. The truck shot past without slowing, those burning headlights sweeping across our parking lot for just a moment before disappearing into the darkness beyond. But in that brief illumination, I saw something that made my stomach drop. There were other figures in the truck bed, shadowy shapes that might have been people, all of them reaching toward our building with desperate, grasping hands. I stayed crouched behind the counter for another 10 minutes, waiting for my heart to stop trying to punch its way out of my chest. When I finally turned the lights back on and flipped the sign to open, my hands were shaking so bad I could barely work the switches. Sadie's words echoed in my head. Some nights are different. Collection night. What the hell was collection night? I was still trying to process what I'd seen when Frank showed up an hour later than usual. His hair was messed up, his shirt wrinkled, and he had this look on his face like he'd been running from something. "Everything okay here?" he asked, but he wouldn't meet my eyes. Define okay. I just watched Ashley drive past in a phantom truck going about 90 miles an hour. Frank went very still. "You saw the truck." "Hard to miss." "What was that, Frank? What's collection night?" "Where did you hear that term?" "Sadie mentioned it before she left. She seemed pretty spooked." Frank rubbed his face with both hands, suddenly looking every one of his 67 years. "Some things are better left alone, Willow. That's what everyone keeps telling me, but I'm the one sitting here watching ghost trucks and following rules I don't understand. I think I deserve some answers. Answers get people hurt. Not knowing gets people hurt too. Look what happened to Ashley." Frank's expression darkened. Ashley got hurt because she thought she was smarter than this place. Thought she could solve it like some kind of puzzle. He gestured toward the journal still sitting on the counter. "How much of that have you read?" "Most of it. The last pages are missing." "Yeah, they are. Ashley took them with her the night she broke Rule 5. Frank moved behind the counter, putting distance between himself and the front windows. She'd figured out too much, started asking the wrong questions. The things here don't like being studied. But what was she trying to figure out? What's really going on here? Frank was quiet for so long I thought he wasn't going to answer. Finally, he sighed. This place is old, Willow. Older than the highway, older than the town. Some spots on the earth are just thin, weak. Things slip through that shouldn't be here. Things like what I saw tonight, among others. Frank started his usual routine of checking the coffee machine, organizing receipts, anything to keep his hands busy. The rules aren't just for safety, they're for containment. Every time someone follows them correctly, it strengthens the barriers. Every time someone breaks them, the barriers get weaker. Exactly. And when they get weak enough, collection night happens. The things that have been trapped here get to take a ride. I thought about Ashley's face in that truck, her silent scream. Where do they go? Nowhere good. Around 3 a.m., Iris walked through the door like she owned the place. But when she saw Ashley's journal open on the counter, her whole demeanor changed. She moved fast, crossing the store in quick strides. "You need to put that away," she said, her voice urgent. "Right now." Why does everyone keep saying that? Because some questions aren't meant to be answered. Iris glanced around the store, checking corners, scanning the ceiling. This place has been watching you since you started reading that thing. Can't you feel it? Now that she mentioned it, I could. That sensation of being observed, of something just outside my peripheral vision tracking my every movement. I'd been so focused on Ashley's notes that I hadn't noticed how the feeling had intensified. What am I supposed to do? Just ignore everything? Pretend this is all normal? You're supposed to survive. Iris leaned across the counter, her dark eyes intense. Ashley thought she could understand this place, control it. Look how that worked out for her. Then what's the point? Why am I even here? Iris studied my face for a long moment. There's a woman in town named Rose Hanson, works at the diner on Main Street. She might be able to give you some context, help you understand what you're dealing with. She straightened up, already moving toward the door. But knowledge here comes with a price, Willow. Make sure you're willing to pay it before you start asking questions. What kind of price? But Iris was already gone, leaving me alone with Ashley's journal and the growing certainty that I was in way over my head. I closed the journal and shoved it under the counter, but I could still feel those missing pages like a phantom limb. Whatever Ashley had discovered in those final entries, it had been important enough to risk everything for, important enough to die for. The rest of my shift crawled by in tense silence, every shadow seeming to hide watching eyes, every creak of the building making me jump. When dawn finally broke through the windows, I felt like I'd been holding my breath for hours. Frank emerged from the back office looking as tired as I felt. You make it through okay? Define okay. He almost smiled at that. Fair enough. You coming back tomorrow? I thought about Rose Hanson, about the missing pages, about Ashley's face in that phantom truck. Yeah, I'll be back. Good. And Willow, be careful who you talk to in town. Not everyone there has your best interests at heart. As I walked to my car, I could feel the truck stop watching me go. But for the first time since I'd started this job, I had a lead. Someone who might actually give me answers instead of warnings. Rose Hanson, the diner on Main Street. I was definitely going to pay her a visit. I parked outside Mel's diner at 2 p.m, my hand still gripping the steering wheel even though the engine was off. The place looked exactly like every small-town diner ever built. Faded red vinyl booths, chrome fixtures that had seen better decades, and windows that needed a good cleaning. Through the glass, I could see maybe 3 customers scattered across the dining room. Rose Hanson. That's who I was looking for. Iris had said she worked here, that she might have answers about what I was dealing with at the truck stop. After 3 nights of following rules I didn't understand and watching phantom trucks barrel down empty highways, I needed someone to tell me what the hell was actually going on. The bell above the door chimed as I walked in, and a woman behind the counter looked up from wiping down coffee cups. She was maybe 55 with short graying blonde hair and the kind of tired eyes that suggested she'd seen too much of something. Her name tag read Rose in faded letters. "Coffee?" she asked, already reaching for a pot. "Actually, I was hoping to talk to you about the truck stop out on Highway 17. Rose's hand froze halfway to the coffee pot. Her whole body went rigid, and when she looked at me again, her expression had completely changed. "I don't know what you're talking about." "My name's Willow Cox. I work nights there. Iris Ramirez said you might be able to help me understand some things." "Iris sent you?" Rose glanced around the nearly empty diner, then gestured toward a booth in the back corner. "Sit, but keep your voice down." I slid into the cracked vinyl seat across from her. Rose poured 2 cups of coffee with hands that shook slightly, then sat down and studied my face like she was looking for something specific. "You're new," she said finally. "How many nights?" 3, and each one's been weirder than the last." Rose nodded slowly. "They always test the new ones, see what you're made of." She wrapped her hands around her coffee cup. "What exactly did Iris tell you?" "Not much, just that you might have some context about what I'm dealing with. I found a journal that belonged to Ashley Gonzalez, the girl who worked there before me. She was documenting everything, trying to figure out patterns." At Ashley's name, Rose's face went pale. "Ashley's dead." "I know. Frank told me she broke one of the rules. But her journal, it's like she was onto something important. The last pages are missing." Rose was quiet for a long time, staring into her coffee like it might have answers floating in it. Finally, she sighed. "That land has been trouble for longer than most people remember. Before the truck stop, before the highway, there was a trading post there. Indigenous families used to warn people away from that spot, said it was thin. Weak. Weak how? Barriers between worlds aren't the same everywhere. Some places, they're like thick walls. Others are more like tissue paper." Rose's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "In the 70s, a group of travelers got stranded there during a blizzard. They were desperate, freezing, probably going to die. Something old heard them calling for help." I leaned forward. "What kind of something?" "The kind that makes deals. Offers you exactly what you need most, but never tells you the real price until it's too late." Rose's hands tightened around her cup. "Those travelers made it through the storm, but they left something behind. A door. A way in. And now things come through. Things that shouldn't be here. Things that feed on desperation, fear, loneliness. They can't go far from the source, but they don't need to. People come to them." I thought about the woman in the red dress, the voices from the washrooms, Ashley's face in that phantom truck. The rules Frank gave me, they're meant to keep these things contained, among other things. Rose glanced around the diner again, making sure we were still alone. "Every person who works there becomes part of the system. The rules aren't just for safety. They're rituals, ways of strengthening the barriers, keeping the door from opening wider." But Ashley tried to break the system. Rose's expression darkened. Ashley thought she was smart enough to outsmart something that's been making deals since before her great-grandmother was born. She found out about the source, tried to destroy it. She shook her head. "You can't destroy something like that. You can only contain it." "What happened to her?" "Same thing that happened to my sister." Rose's voice went flat, emotionless. "Linda worked there in the early 2000s. Lasted about 6 months before she got an offer she couldn't refuse." "What kind of offer?" "The kind that seems like salvation but turns out to be damnation." Rose pulled a worn photograph from her wallet and slid it across the table. It showed two women who looked like sisters, standing in front of the truck stop. One was clearly a younger Rose. The other had the same bone structure but hollow eyes, like someone had scooped out everything that made her human. Linda came back wrong after she accepted the deal. Still looked like my sister, still knew all the same memories. But something essential was missing. She lasted about a week before she just disappeared, like she'd never existed at all. I stared at the photograph, thinking about Ashley's desperate face in that truck. Who makes these offers? Man in a gray suit, looks younger than he should, talks like he's got all the time in the world. He shows up when people are at their lowest, offers them exactly what they think they need. My blood went cold. Have you seen him recently? Not for years, but if you're asking, that probably means he's taking an interest in you. Rose leaned across the table. Whatever he offers, whatever it costs, the answer is no. Always no. What if it's something you really need? Especially then. Rose's eyes were fierce now, urgent. That's how he gets you. He finds the one thing you can't live without and dangles it in front of you like bait. I thought about my mother, about the last fight we'd had before she died, about all the things I'd never gotten to say, never gotten to fix. If someone offered me a chance to see her again, to apologize. I can see it in your face, Rose said quietly. Whatever you're thinking about, whatever you've lost, it's not worth it. Trust me. The bell above the door chimed, and we both looked up to see a man in work clothes heading for the counter. Rose immediately stood up, slipping back into her waitress persona. "Think about what I told you," she said, loud enough for the other customer to hear. "And be careful driving out there. Roads can be dangerous at night." I left the diner with more questions than answers, but at least now I had context. The truck stop wasn't just haunted, it was infected, and whatever was making deals with desperate people had been doing it for decades. That night, I walked into the truck stop with Rose's warnings echoing in my head. Frank was behind the counter as usual, but when he saw my expression, his whole demeanor changed. "You talked to someone in town," he said. Not a question. Rose Hanson. She told me about her sister, about the trading post, about deals with things that shouldn't exist. I pulled out Ashley's journal and set it on the counter. "How long have you really been here, Frank?" Frank's shoulders sagged like I'd just cut the strings holding him upright. "Longer than I should be." "How long?" "Since 1987. I did the math in my head. 36 years. Frank would have been in his 30s when he started, which meant he should be over 100 now. But he looked maybe 70 and moved like someone 20 years younger. That's not possible. A lot of things aren't possible until they happen to you." Frank started his usual routine of checking the coffee machine, but his movements were mechanical, distracted. "I had a daughter, Emma. She was 8 years old and she died in a car accident that I was supposed to prevent." The pain in his voice was so raw it made my chest ache. "Frank. I was supposed to pick her up from school that day. Got caught up at work, figured she could walk home like always. But it was raining and the roads were slick and some drunk idiot ran a red light." Frank's hands stilled on the coffee machine. "She died because I wasn't there. That wasn't your fault. Try telling that to a grieving father." Frank turned to face me, and I could see decades of guilt etched into every line of his face. I was at her funeral when he approached me. Man in a gray suit, looked like he'd stepped out of a magazine. Said he could give me one day with her, one perfect day to say goodbye properly. My stomach dropped. "You said yes. Wouldn't you have?" Frank's voice was barely a whisper. "One day with my little girl. One chance to tell her I was sorry, that I loved her, that her death wasn't her fault for walking home in the rain. All I had to do was work here for a year. But you're still here. Because when that day ended, when I had to watch her fade away again, I couldn't do it. So I made another deal. Permanent service in exchange for... Frank's voice broke. In exchange for keeping her close. The building creaked around us, settling into the rhythm of another night shift. But now every sound felt different, weighted with decades of grief and impossible choices. "She's here," I said. "Your daughter. She's still here." Frank nodded, unable to speak. "Frank, that's not really her. Whatever deal you made, whatever you think you're protecting. I know." The words came out like a confession. I've known for years, but knowing and accepting are different things. We worked in silence for the next few hours, the weight of Frank's revelation hanging between us like a physical thing. I understood now why he looked so tired, why his hands shook, why he moved through the truck stop like a man carrying the world on his shoulders. At 2 a.m., the front door chimed. I looked up from restocking the candy aisle to see a man walking through the entrance. He was younger than I'd expected, maybe 40, with dark hair and the kind of face that belonged in a cologne advertisement. His gray suit was perfectly tailored, and he moved with the fluid confidence of someone who'd never doubted himself about anything. But his eyes were wrong, too old, too knowing, like he'd been watching the world turn for centuries. "Good evening, Willow," he said, and his voice was warm honey over broken glass. "I've been looking forward to meeting you." Every instinct I had screamed at me to run, but my feet felt rooted to the floor. Behind the counter, Frank had gone completely still. "I don't think we've been introduced," I managed. "Oh, but we have. I knew your mother quite well. Sarah Cox, lovely woman. Such a shame about the cancer." The man's smile was perfect and terrible. "I imagine you have some regrets about how things ended between you." The air in the store felt thick, oppressive. I could barely breathe. "What do you want?" "To help. That's all I've ever wanted." He moved closer and I caught a whiff of something that might have been expensive cologne or might have been sulfur. "I know about your last conversation with Sarah. The things you said, the things you didn't say, the way you left town instead of staying to help her through treatment. Stop. She called for you, you know. Near the end, kept asking the nurses when her daughter was coming home." His voice was gentle, sympathetic, and it cut through me like a blade. "I could arrange a meeting, one conversation, a chance to apologize, to tell her you love her, to hear her say she forgives you." The temptation hit me like a physical blow. To see my mother again, to take back the cruel things I'd said during our last fight, to tell her I was sorry for being such a coward about her illness. It was everything I'd wanted since the day she died. Something grabbed my wrist under the counter. Frank's hand, his fingers digging into my skin hard enough to bruise. The pain cut through the fog in my head, grounded me in the present moment. "No," I said, and my voice sounded stronger than I felt. The man's smile never wavered. "Are you certain? This is a limited time offer." I said no. Pity. He straightened his tie, completely unbothered by my rejection. "Well, if you change your mind, you know where to find me. I'll be around." He turned and walked back toward the door, but paused at the threshold. "Oh, and Willow? Give my regards to Frank. We have so much history together." The door chimed as he left, and I collapsed against the counter, my legs suddenly unable to support my weight. Frank's hand was still gripping my wrist, and I could feel him shaking. "That was him," I whispered. "The man in the gray suit." "Yeah." Frank's voice was hollow. "That was him." "Frank, what did you do? What deal did you really make?" Frank looked at me with eyes full of 36 years of regret. "The same one he just offered you." And I said yes. The weight of Frank's confession settled over us like a shroud. 36 years. His daughter, dead because he wasn't there when she needed him most. A deal made in grief. then another made in desperation when he couldn't let go. I wanted to say something, anything. But what do you tell someone who's been trapped by their own love for over 3 decades? That it wasn't his fault? That he'd made the only choice any parent would make? The words felt hollow before I could even speak them. Frank moved through his usual routines, checking the coffee machine, organizing receipts, wiping down surfaces that were already clean. But now I could see it for what it really was. Not nervous energy or perfectionism, ritual. 36 years of the same motions, the same patterns, keeping himself busy while his daughter existed somewhere in this building, in a state that wasn't quite life and wasn't quite death. Does she know? I asked finally. Emma, does she understand what happened? Frank's hands stilled on the register. Sometimes I think she does. Other times, he shook his head. She's 8 years old forever. How do you explain eternity to a child? The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting their harsh shadows into every corner. I found myself looking for her. This little girl who'd been dead for decades but somehow still existed here. Was she watching us right now? Could she hear her father talking about her like she was both the most precious thing in the world and his greatest mistake? The man in the gray suit, I said. When he comes back, he will come back. They always do when they think they've found someone new. Frank finally looked at me, and his eyes were ancient. He'll offer you exactly what you need most, and it'll sound reasonable, even generous. That's how they work. I thought about my mother's face the last time I saw her. How I'd stormed out after accusing her of giving up, of not fighting hard enough. The cancer had already won by then, but I was too angry and scared to admit it. Too proud to stay and watch her die. What if someone said no to him? What if they just refused the deal completely? Some do. Most people aren't desperate enough when he first approaches them. Frank resumed his cleaning, but his movements were slower now, more deliberate. But he's patient. He'll wait until you are. The next few hours crawled by in tense silence. A couple truckers came through for coffee and snacks, normal transactions that felt surreal after everything I'd learned. How could people just buy energy drinks and beef jerky in a place where a grieving father had sold his soul to keep his dead daughter close? But maybe that was the point. Maybe the normal moments were what made the impossible ones bearable. At 4 a.m., everything went wrong at once. The wind chimes erupted in a frantic symphony, ringing so violently they sounded like they might tear themselves apart. Through the windows, I could see headlights approaching from every direction, north, south, east, and west, all converging on our little island of fluorescent light. From the washrooms came a chorus of voices, men and women and children, all crying for help in languages I didn't recognize. The sound was deafening, desperate, like every person who'd ever been lost or afraid was calling out at the same time. And then I saw her. The woman in the red dress stood in the center of the store, between the candy aisle and the coffee machine. She was exactly what I'd expected, and nothing like I'd imagined. Beautiful in a way that hurt to look at, with dark hair that moved like it was underwater, and skin so pale it seemed to glow. Her dress was the color of fresh blood, and it flowed around her like liquid. Rule 5. Never look directly at the woman in the red dress. I dropped behind the counter so fast I scraped my knees on the concrete floor. My heart was hammering against my ribs, and every instinct screamed at me to run. But there was nowhere to go. The headlights outside were getting closer, and the voices from the washrooms were getting louder. Willow! The woman's voice cut through the chaos like a knife through silk. Willow, please look at me. It was Ashley's voice, sweet and desperate and so familiar from the recordings I'd found on her phone. But Ashley was dead, trapped in that phantom truck, screaming silently as she raced down endless highways. Don't listen, Frank whispered from somewhere behind the counter. It's not her. It's never really them. I know you can hear me, the voice continued, and now it sounded like my mother. like Sarah Cox calling me home for dinner when I was 8 years old. I just want to talk to you, sweetheart. Just look at me for a second. My head started to turn before I caught myself. The pull was incredible, like gravity itself was trying to force my eyes upward. I pressed my face against the floor and focused on the pattern in the linoleum, counting tiles and cracks, and anything that would keep me from looking up. "She's scared," the voice said, and now it was Ashley again. The girl in the red dress. She's been trapped here so long and she just wants someone to see her. Really see her. Is that so much to ask? The headlights outside were close enough now that I could hear engines, multiple vehicles circling the building like sharks. The wind chimes were ringing so hard they sounded like breaking glass. "Willow, please." My mother's voice again, weak and tired like it had been near the end. "I'm so cold. I've been waiting for you to come home." I bit down on my lip hard enough to taste blood. The pain helped, gave me something real to focus on. This wasn't my mother. My mother was dead and buried in Riverside Cemetery, and whatever was wearing her voice was something that fed on grief and desperation. But God, it sounded like her. "They're testing you," Frank whispered, "seeing how far they can push before you break. Ashley lasted 2 weeks before she looked up. What happens if I look? You become part of it. Part of the collection." The voices from the washrooms were getting closer, spilling out into the main store. I could hear wet footsteps on the linoleum, dozens of them, all moving toward our hiding spot behind the counter. The woman in the red dress was still talking, cycling through voices I recognized and some I didn't, each one perfectly calibrated to hit me where it hurt most. Then, the front door exploded inward. Iris burst through like she was being chased by demons, shouting words in a language that sounded older than civilization. The syllables seemed to have weight, pressing against the air itself and making the fluorescent lights flicker. The chaos stopped instantly. The wind chimes fell silent. The headlights outside vanished. The voices from the washrooms cut off mid-scream, leaving only the normal hum of the building's electrical systems. I risked a glance upward and saw that the woman in the red dress was gone. Iris stood in the doorway, breathing hard, her dark eyes scanning every corner of the store. She was wearing the same practical clothes as always, but now I could see things I'd missed before. A leather cord around her neck held what looked like carved bone. Her boots had symbols etched into the leather. Her jacket pockets bulged with shapes that definitely weren't normal trucking supplies. "Everyone okay?" she asked, but she was still watching the shadows. Frank emerged from behind the counter looking older than I'd ever seen him. "How did you know?" "Felt it from 20 miles out. The barriers are getting weaker." Iris finally relaxed slightly, but she didn't move away from the door. "This was a coordinated attack. They're getting desperate." "Desperate for what?" I asked, still crouched on the floor. Iris looked at me for a long moment, like she was weighing something important. "For a replacement. Frank's been holding this place together for 36 years, but the deal he made is wearing thin." "I don't understand." "The truck stop needs a guardian, someone who chooses to stay, who accepts the responsibility willingly." Iris glanced at Frank, and something passed between them. "The things here can't just take someone. There has to be consent, even if it's coerced." Frank's shoulders sagged. "That's why Ashley broke. She figured out that someone had to stay and she couldn't handle the weight of choosing." "But there has to be another way," I said. "Some way to close this place down, seal it off permanently." Ashley thought so too. Iris moved further into the store, checking corners and shadows with practiced efficiency. She found references to binding rituals, ways to lock the doorway from this side. But when she tried to perform one, she got trapped between worlds, Frank finished, neither fully alive nor fully dead. The things here don't like being caged. I thought about Ashley's face in that phantom truck, her silent scream as she raced down endless highways. So she's still out there, still suffering. Until someone takes Frank's place and learns how to help her properly. Iris stopped in front of the counter, her expression serious. That's why I've been watching you, Willow. Why I've been checking on your progress. You think I could do this job? I think you might be the first person in decades who has a real choice in the matter. Iris pulled something from her jacket pocket, a small leather pouch that smelled like sage and something else I couldn't identify. Your grandmother was part of our network. She watched a doorway up in Manitoba for 40 years before it finally sealed itself. My blood went cold. My grandmother? Mary Crow Feather. She never told your mother about the work, wanted to keep her safe from it. But these things run in bloodlines sometimes. The ability to see clearly, to resist their influence. Iris set the pouch on the counter. That's why you've been able to follow the rules so well. Why you didn't look up tonight when everything in you wanted to. Frank was staring at me with something that might have been hope. Your grandmother. She was a guardian, one of the best. Iris nodded toward the pouch. She left instructions, ways to strengthen the barriers, rituals that work better than Frank's 5 rules. But they require someone with the right bloodline to perform them. I looked at the pouch, then at Frank's exhausted face, then at Iris's expectant expression. What exactly are you asking me to do? Choose, Iris said simply. Frank can't leave until someone willingly takes his place, and the longer he stays, the weaker he gets. Eventually, the barriers will fail completely. And if I say no, then you walk away and we find someone else. But there might not be time for that. Iris glanced toward the windows, where dawn was still hours away. The attacks are getting stronger, more coordinated. Something's coming, and we need a guardian who can handle it. Frank stepped forward, and for the first time since I'd met him, he looked directly at me without flinching. I won't lie to you, Willow. This job will cost you everything. Your freedom, your normal life, probably your sanity eventually, but it's also the most important work you'll ever do. Protecting people. Protecting everyone. Not just the people who come through here, but everyone those things might reach if they ever got loose. Frank's voice was steady now, certain. I've spent 36 years keeping them contained. It's been worth it, even with everything I've lost. I thought about my mother, about the fight we'd had and the things I'd never gotten to say. About Ashley, trapped between worlds because she'd tried to solve a problem that couldn't be solved. About Frank, carrying the weight of an impossible choice for longer than I'd been alive. If I said yes, I said slowly, what would happen to you? Frank smiled, and for the first time since I'd met him, it reached his eyes. I'd get to rest. Finally get to see Emma again, properly this time. And the truck stop? Would be yours to protect. Your rules, your methods, your responsibility. Iris touched the leather pouch again. But you wouldn't be alone. There are others like us, watching other doorways. We help each other when we can. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting their harsh shadows into every corner. Outside, the highway stretched empty in both directions, carrying travelers who had no idea what they were passing by. Normal people living normal lives, protected by guardians they'd never know existed. I picked up the leather pouch. It was warm to the touch, and I could feel something shifting inside it. What's in here? Instructions, rituals, everything your grandmother learned about keeping doorways sealed. Iris's expression was serious. But once you open it, once you read what's inside, there's no going back. The knowledge itself will bind you to this place. I looked at Frank, who was watching me with decades of hope and exhaustion in his eyes. At Iris, who'd spent years watching and waiting for someone who might be able to take over. At the truck stop around us, this impossible place that stood between our world and something much worse. How long do I have to decide? Until dawn, Iris said. After that, the choice gets made for you one way or another. I clutched the pouch tighter, feeling the weight of everything it represented. My grandmother's legacy, Frank's freedom, Ashley's chance at peace, the safety of everyone who'd never know how close they came to something terrible. Outside, the first hint of gray was touching the eastern horizon. Dawn was coming, and with it the end of everything I'd thought my life was going to be. But maybe that wasn't such a bad thing. Dawn crept across the parking lot like spilled honey, and with it came the truth about everything. Iris sat across from me in the back booth, the leather pouch open between us on the cracked vinyl table. Inside were photographs, handwritten notes in multiple languages, and what looked like maps of places that shouldn't exist. Frank stood behind the counter, making coffee with hands that had finally stopped shaking. "Your grandmother wasn't the only one," Iris said, spreading the photographs across the table. "There's a whole network of us, guardians watching doorways, keeping the barriers strong." I picked up one of the photos, a black and white image of a woman who looked exactly like me, standing in front of what might have been a gas station, or might have been something else entirely. The resemblance was so strong it made my chest tight. "Mary Crow Feather," Iris continued. "She watched a doorway near Thompson, Manitoba for 40 years, kept detailed records of everything she learned." Why didn't my mother know? Because Mary wanted to keep her safe. The knowledge itself is dangerous. Once you understand what's really out there, you can't unknow it. Iris touched another photograph, this one showing a group of people standing in front of various buildings, gas stations, diners, motels. All of them looked normal except for something in the shadows that didn't quite belong. But the calling runs in bloodlines, the ability to see clearly, to resist their influence. Frank brought over 3 cups of coffee, his movements careful and deliberate. "That's why you've been able to handle the rules so well. Most people break within the first week. Ashley lasted 3 weeks. Ashley was fighting her nature instead of accepting it." Iris pulled out a leather-bound journal, its pages yellow with age. She found some of this information, but she approached it like an academic problem instead of understanding what it really meant. I opened the journal to a random page and saw my grandmother's handwriting, neat and precise, documenting something called a convergence event and the rituals needed to contain it. The words seemed to shift on the page, rearranging themselves into patterns that made my head ache. "The truck stop isn't just haunted," Frank said quietly. "It's a doorway, a weak spot between our world and somewhere else. The things that come through, they're not ghosts or demons or anything you'd find in books. They're something older." "Older how?" "Older than human civilization. Older than most of the things humans have names for." Iris turned to a page covered in symbols that hurt to look at directly. "They exist in the spaces between spaces, and they're always looking for ways to expand their territory." The coffee tasted like ash in my mouth, and the guardians keep them contained. "We maintain the barriers. Every doorway has its own methods, its own rituals." Frank gestured toward the 5 rules still taped to the register. "Those aren't arbitrary. They're a binding spell, performed over and over to keep the seal strong." But Ashley tried to destroy it completely. She found references to closing rituals, ways to seal a doorway permanently. Iris's expression darkened. What she didn't understand was that some doorways can't be closed from this side. They can only be contained. I thought about Ashley's face in that phantom truck, her silent scream as she raced down endless highways. So when she tried the ritual, she got caught between worlds, neither fully here nor fully there. Frank's voice was heavy with guilt. I should have explained better, should have made her understand the consequences. "You couldn't have known she'd try something so dangerous." I knew she was asking the wrong questions. I knew she was getting desperate. Frank stared into his coffee like it might hold absolution. "I just didn't think she'd act on it." The front door chimed, and we all looked up to see Sadie walking in with a cardboard box under her arm. She looked exhausted, like she'd been up all night, but her expression was determined. "I brought the archives," she said, setting the box on the counter. "Everything I could find about previous guardians." Iris raised an eyebrow. "You've been keeping records?" "Someone had to." Sadie opened the box and pulled out manila folders, each one labeled with dates going back decades. "I've been documenting everything since I started working here. Patterns, incidents, personnel changes." She spread the folders across the counter, and I saw my own name on the most recent one. Inside were copies of my job application, notes about my performance, and photographs I didn't remember anyone taking. "You've been watching me." "We've all been watching you." Sadie pulled out an older folder, this one labeled 1987-1989. Inside was a photograph that made my blood freeze. It showed a group of people standing in front of the truck stop. Frank was there, looking exactly the same as he did now. Next to him stood a woman I recognized from Rose's photograph, her sister Linda. And beside Linda, unmistakably, was my grandmother. "Mary came here when Frank first started," Sadie explained. "She helped him understand what he'd gotten himself into, taught him the basics of maintaining barriers." "She knew about this place?" "She knew about all the places." Iris took the photograph, studying it with something that might have been nostalgia. "Mary was one of our best consultants. When a new doorway opened or an old one started acting up, she'd travel there and help the local guardian get things under control." Frank was staring at the photograph with an expression I couldn't read. "She tried to help me find another way, some method that wouldn't require permanent service." "Did she find one?" "No, but she did teach me how to make the burden lighter." Frank touched the edge of the photograph. "The 5 rules, the specific timing, the way I organized everything, that was all based on her research." I looked at my grandmother's face in the photograph, seeing my own features reflected back at me across decades. She looked confident, competent, like someone who understood exactly what she was dealing with. "Why didn't she stay? Why didn't she take over for you?" "Because she had her own doorway to watch." Iris pulled out a map covered in red dots, each one marking a location. "There are dozens of these places across North America. Most of them are stable, contained, but some require constant attention. And now her doorway is sealed, and I'm here. The calling doesn't always pass directly from parent to child. Sometimes it skips generations, waits for the right circumstances." Iris folded the map carefully. "Your mother never showed any sensitivity to supernatural activity, but you've been seeing things your whole life, haven't you?" I thought about the cold spots in our old house, the feeling of being watched in empty rooms, the way shadows sometimes moved when they shouldn't. I thought everyone experienced that. Most people learn to ignore it. You never did. The sun was fully up now, streaming through the windows and making the fluorescent lights seem pale and unnecessary. In the daylight, the truck stop looked almost normal. Just another roadside business serving coffee and snacks to travelers. But I could feel it now, the weight of what lay beneath the surface. The doorway, the barriers, the constant vigilance required to keep something terrible from spilling into our world. "There's something else," Sadie said quietly. She pulled out a folder marked with yesterday's date. "The man in the gray suit has been more active lately, more aggressive in his recruitment." "Recruitment?" "He doesn't just make deals with desperate people. He's been actively seeking out potential guardians, trying to corrupt them before they can take their positions." Iris's expression was grim. 3 doorways have fallen in the past year because their guardians accepted his offers. Frank went very still. 3? Manitoba, Oregon, and New Mexico. All of them had guardians who'd been in place for decades. All of them suddenly made deals that compromised their positions. Iris looked directly at me. "He's not just interested in individual souls anymore. He's trying to systematically weaken the entire network. The implications hit me like a physical blow. He's planning something big. A convergence. Multiple doorways opening simultaneously, creating a cascade effect that could tear holes in reality itself. Iris gathered the photographs back into a neat pile. That's why we need strong guardians in place. People who can resist his influence when the pressure really starts. I thought about last night, about how tempting his offer had been. The chance to see my mother again, to apologize for all the things I'd said and done wrong. Even knowing it was a trap, part of me had wanted to say yes. What if I'm not strong enough? You are. Frank's voice was certain. You proved that last night when you said no to him. Most people can't resist on their first encounter. But what if he comes back with a better offer? Then you say no again. Iris leaned forward, her dark eyes intense. The key is understanding that whatever he offers, it's never what it seems. Your mother wouldn't want you to sacrifice yourself for a few minutes of conversation. She'd want you to live, to find purpose, to help people. I looked around the truck stop, at the coffee machine and the candy aisles, and the wind chimes hanging above the door. At Frank, who'd spent 36 years of his life maintaining this place. At Sadie, who'd documented everything despite her fear. At Iris, who'd traveled hundreds of miles to help a stranger understand her destiny. If I do this, I said slowly, what happens to Frank? Frank smiled, and for the first time since I'd met him, it was completely genuine. I get to rest. I get to see Emma again, properly this time. And the truck stop becomes yours. Your responsibility, your methods, your rules. Iris touched the leather pouch again. But you won't be alone. We'll help you learn, help you understand what your grandmother knew. The front door chimed again, and we all turned to see the man in the gray suit walking in. But something was different this time. He looked less polished, less confident. His perfect suit was wrinkled, and there were dark circles under his eyes. Willow, he said, and his voice had lost its honey-smooth quality. I'm here to make you a final offer. She's not interested, Frank said, stepping protectively in front of me. Oh, but I think she might be. The man's smile was sharp now, predatory. Because this time, I'm not offering her something she wants. I'm offering her something she needs. He gestured toward the windows, and I saw them. Cars pulling into the parking lot. Dozens of them, all filled with people I recognized. My co-workers from previous jobs, neighbors from my childhood, friends I'd lost touch with over the years. And in the front seat of the closest car, looking exactly as she had the day she died, was my mother. They're all real, the man said softly. Every person you've ever cared about, everyone you've ever lost. I can bring them back, give you a second chance with all of them. All you have to do is walk away from this place and never look back. The temptation was overwhelming. Not just my mother, but everyone. Every relationship I'd damaged, every goodbye I'd never gotten to say, every person whose death had left a hole in my life. But I looked at Frank, who was watching me with 36 years of hope in his eyes, at Iris, who'd spent her life protecting people who'd never know her name, at Sadie, who'd stayed despite her fear because someone had to document the truth, at the truck stop itself, this impossible place that stood between our world and something much worse. No, I said, and my voice was steady. The answer is no. The man's expression twisted with rage. You're making a mistake. Maybe, but it's my mistake to make. He stared at me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Very well. But understand this, Willow Cox. Once you accept this responsibility, there's no going back. No changing your mind, no walking away when it gets too hard. I understand. Do you? He stepped closer. and I could smell sulfur and decay beneath his expensive cologne. Do you understand that you'll spend the rest of your life in this place watching the same four walls, following the same routines, protecting people who will never thank you for it? Yes. Do you understand that you'll watch everyone you care about grow old and die while you remain here, bound to this doorway until someone else takes your place? I thought about my grandmother, who'd spent 40 years watching a doorway in Manitoba. About Frank, who'd given up everything to keep his daughter close. About Ashley, who'd tried to find another way and paid the ultimate price. I understand. The man in the gray suit smiled one last time, but there was no warmth in it. Then welcome to eternity, Guardian. He turned and walked toward the door, but as he reached the threshold, he began to fade. By the time the door chimed, he was gone completely. Outside, the parking lot was empty again. No cars, no people, no impossible second chances. Just the highway stretching in both directions and the morning sun climbing higher in the sky. Frank walked over to the register and pulled out a set of keys. "These are yours now," he said, holding them out to me. "The truck stop, the responsibility, everything." I took the keys, feeling their weight in my palm. They were warm, like they'd been waiting for me. "Any advice?" "Trust your instincts. Follow your grandmother's methods when you can, but don't be afraid to adapt them to your own style." Frank looked around the truck stop one last time. "And remember that the work matters. Every night you're here, every rule you follow, every barrier you maintain, it all matters. What about Emma?" Frank's smile was peaceful now, content. "She's waiting for me. Has been for 36 years. He walked toward the front door, then paused. "Take care of this place, Willow. It's more important than you know." He stepped outside into the morning sunlight, and I watched through the windows as he walked across the parking lot. With each step, he seemed to become more translucent, more insubstantial. By the time he reached the highway, he was nothing but light and shadow. Then he was gone. I stood behind the counter holding the keys to my new life, my new responsibility. Iris was packing up the photographs and documents, preparing to leave. Sadie was organizing her files, making notes about the transition. "So what happens now?" I asked. "Now you learn," Iris said. "You study your grandmother's methods, you develop your own routines, you keep the barriers strong." She handed me a business card with just a phone number on it. "And when you need help, you call." "Will I see you again?" "Probably. I make rounds, check on all the guardians in my territory." Iris shouldered her bag and headed for the door. "But mostly, you'll be on your own. That's the nature of the work." Sadie finished organizing her files and looked at me with something that might have been respect. "I'll still handle the day shift, manage the business side of things, but the nights are yours now. Thank you." "Don't thank me yet. Wait until you've been here a year, then we'll see how you feel." She left, and I was alone in the truck stop for the first time as its guardian. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. The coffee machine gurgled quietly, and somewhere in the building's bones I could feel the doorway waiting. I walked over to the register and carefully removed Frank's 5 rules. They'd served their purpose, kept this place safe for 36 years. But now it was time for something new. I pulled out a pen and a fresh piece of paper, thinking about my grandmother's research, about the symbols and rituals I'd glimpsed in her journal, about the responsibility that was now mine to bear. At the top of the page, I wrote, "Guardian Protocols, Willow Cox." Then I began to write the rules that would keep the world safe for the next however many years I had left. Outside, the highway stretched empty in both directions, carrying travelers who had no idea what they were passing by. Normal people living normal lives, protected by guardians they'd never know existed. And that was exactly how it should be.